Hello, Marcy. Welcome to the Mentally a Badass podcast. I'm so happy to have you today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. I was looking over all about you yesterday, aka my stalking, what I do for all my guests. I found it very intriguing that you are a storytelling coach, and it's a great alternative treatment when it comes to healing with trauma, which I feel like maybe some people are doing it subconsciously. Don't like for me when I was writing my articles on Medium, I'm like healing myself and didn't really do it, didn't really know it. And so I'm just excited to talk more about that. And every Mentally About Us episode, we like to first go deep into your past to learn more about you. So I read here that you are a survivor of a narcissistic martial abuse. So we do have that topic on here a lot. So let's get into your story. Where would
Yeah.
you like to begin on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where do I want to begin? I mean, I guess what would be important for me for others to know is how I ended up there.
Hmm.
And that is that I just for my whole life really felt worthless. Really, I mean, I felt like I deserved mistreatment. I felt like everybody was a mirror in some way. And if they didn't like me, somehow that was a true reflection of my defaults or weaknesses or what just made me unable to love or desire to be around or whatever it was. And so that deep sense of like being ugly or too fat or too just undesirable to people really laid fertile soil for me to end up in a relationship that would be abusive and harmful. I'm sure I attracted people and a person ultimately that could really exploit that in me and use it against me for their gain. So, I don't think you just wake up one day a really healthy, secure, whole person in a relationship where somebody is abusing you or taking advantage of you. Just by nature of not knowing that I had worth,
Hmm.
ended up in that kind of situation.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I totally can understand where you come from when it comes to not feeling worthy of love. And I'm
Mhm.
so sorry you had to go and feel like that. I'm assuming, were you bullied as like a child?
In some ways, but even then, I was so shy, like probably not as much as you would think, but in my perception, even as a child, like nobody wanted to be around me. And there were some
Mm.
bullying instances, but not like, I don't know, not more than the average person. But
Yeah.
anything that did happen, right, sort of fed that little story I had as a little girl that no one, that I just wasn't likable. Even though I probably was really likable, but I didn't know that. I didn't know it. And so any negative interaction I had just sort of fed that story. And any positive interaction I had, I probably wrote off as like, oh, they're just being so nice to me. Like they're a really good person because they're able to be nice to someone who doesn't deserve it. So I don't know like even where exactly I picked that up. I mean,
Hmm.
our culture is constantly telling us we're not good enough, right?
Hmm.
My parents were separated for a couple of years. There was never any communication with me that that was my fault or I did anything, but I'm sure deep down there was some kind of story I had there too about any role I might have played in that, or I don't know. I just from so young had this story in me that I wasn't good enough, and yeah, so it's interesting.
Yeah, I totally understand the feeling. Like people don't necessarily have to like kids come up to you and being like, you're a loser, you're weird. It's just like if people aren't like hang out with you, or I don't know if this ever happened to you, but in gym class when they there's two team leaders and then they pick the kids. I was like always the last one or like the second to
Yeah.
last. Has that ever
Uh-huh.
happened to you?
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So like that's a perfect example. It's like they're not meant to be mean. It's just like then it's like you have these repetitive feeling of I'm not good enough because they don't want me. And then it's like, I feel like no one really talks about that. If you
Mhm.
know what I mean. I've noticed that. I thought about it randomly one night when I was going to bed. I was like, I don't know why these random thoughts come into my head, but no one talks about it. So I just wanted
Yeah.
to just bring that up. But when you were in high school, did you have any relationships that were like a narcissistic relationship? Tell me how your high school relationships were.
Yeah, I mean, real similar. So I moved from Southern California to Central California in eighth grade, and the culture difference was so profound, even though it was the same state. So I moved from this really big city to this smaller town where everyone had gone to school together from kindergarten. So right away, I'm in these crucial years of development and trying to find out where I fit and where I belong. Not that I even always knew where that was, where I had come from, but definitely not here. And so I did make friends, but they were always kind of the underdogs or the other kids that nobody really wanted to be around. I think I just had a heart for them because I felt like them, even if I really wasn't. I don't know. I don't know how others perceived me, but I know how I perceived me. And it was very, very small and insignificant. And so I would find other kids who seemed that way to me, like do everything in my power to be their friend to show them differently. So I don't know that specifically I had like narcissistic friends in high school. I feel like I just had the normal underdeveloped brain teenage hormone friends. And I was one of them, right? Like, and I know I went through bouts of depression, at times suicidal ideation, just or not even just ideation, but just because I just felt so worthless. And this went through, I mean, actually, this went through all the way until just a handful of years ago. Like leaving
Hmm.
that relationship became a catalyst for me to see that finally see that I have worth and value and that I don't deserve to be yelled at. I don't deserve to be ignored, criticized, like none of those things that happened. I will not accept that ever again, ever again. But I'm like, it took me into my 40s, late 30s, early 40s to begin to even believe there's a possibility that that story I've had my whole life wasn't entirely true. And so I think even in high school, I had good friends, but I don't know that I could even fully experience how good any of them were because of my own sense of worthlessness. So even if I'd had the like healthiest, wholest, best friends in the world, I don't know that I could have fully experienced it just because of my own brokenness, my own sense of self being so broken. So
Hmm.
no, I wouldn't say there. I think there's other like family members that I wasn't raised around and then maybe some that I were that had some of those tendencies. But for the most part, the idea of people being so like those traits of narcissism
Hmm.
weren't so familiar to me until I got a little older. And I think it is just that I think people like me who had such little worth and have a heart for others become easy targets for narcissists because you can walk over us a bunch and we're going to be loyal and faithful and we're always going to see the good in you and want the good for you and champion you no matter what you do to us. And I think, if I got through life fairly unscathed up until that point, um, young adulthood, then I attracted all of them.
When you were in your marriage and such,
Yeah.
when did you know that you were being abused? Like you mentioned, you didn't know certain signs in high school, which totally makes sense. I mean, when I was in
Yeah.
high school or a child, like you don't think of that. We're like, what's a narcissist? I don't get it. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So when did you know that you were being abused?
I didn't know until he admitted it.
Really? Okay. Can we talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, and I think this is really important because there is a common question when you meet somebody who's left abused, like, "Why did you stay?" or "Why did you go back?" So many people go back.
Hmm.
And now I understand how you cannot know what to call what's happening to you. So I was in a regular cycle of being stonewalled, ignored for, I mean, sometimes days, but weeks. Just I didn't even exist for chunks of time in my own house. And then towards the end of not existing would begin like nitpicking everything and being super critical. And I couldn't do anything right. So I went from like not being seen at all to hyper seen. Like everything I
Hmm.
did was wrong to then what would ultimately lead in this huge rage, like this huge explosive rage. And then in that rage, of course, I'm like, how this isn't even I didn't what do you need? Like what can I do to make this better? And I'm, a wreck, an emotional wreck. And usually at the end of that, my spouse would say, like, "Oh my gosh, none of that was true, huh?" Like I had made up a lot of that in my head. And I'd be like, "Yeah, like, we could have addressed the initial feeling you had a long time ago and not gone through this whole cycle." So then he would feel great after exploding, and I'm a wreck. And that would lead to some love bombing, like, "Oh my gosh, you're the most incredible person that you would do, like, handle, like, do this with me, that you would stay with me when I do this." And I'm like, "Yeah, I am pretty incredible, even if I'm worthless, like, oh my gosh." And then we just go round and round and round. And I still there, being a Christian in a church culture, understood that unconditional love was my job. And I would get reminded of that. He would remind me of that. Like, oh, you can't do your part. Like if I'm not doing mine. So if I would ask, like, please, could we have some emotional connection? Could you nurture our relationship in some way? Like, I would get like, oh, you can't do your part then, like if I'm not perfect. And so it would just come back at me that my job was always to keep everything together, to keep him happy no matter how I was treated. So, and then I'd never been married before. So I didn't have any other, or even in a relationship. Okay. I'd never been.
Okay.
So this tied into my sense of worthlessness. Like nobody ever asked to date me. So I married my first boyfriend and I was in my early 20s. So that fed my story too. Like nobody wants me, see, because nobody has ever pursued me. And then here comes this person and like at least he's trying. Like no one else even tried. At least he's trying to love me and I'm so hard to love, but at least, at least this. So yeah, I thought it was my responsibility. I thought it was my fault. And then I thought like I made my bed. I have to lie in it. Like this is what now here we are. This is the decision you made. There a few years ago, 2019, he went through one of these cycles and he had his explosive rage. And this time my nervous system had a trauma response. So it kicked me into dissociation. I felt like I was sent to the Bahamas with a margarita to just chill for a bit, and that my body was just like sending a stand in to keep my body warm until I could come home, like come back to
Mm.
my body. It was the weirdest feeling, but it made me very chill. So in that explosion, I wasn't crying, I wasn't reactive. He's like threatening things at me. I don't know how to live with you anymore. I don't know how to do this. I'm not going on our family trip. And I was just super chill. I was just like, okay, well, you'll take some time to figure it out. You got what it takes. You'll figure. He'd thrown a bunch of Bible verses at me. And so I was like, yeah,
God.
maybe there's something in the Bible that will help you know how to live with me, and how to do this. And you can decide about the trip. Like if you don't want to go, I understand. So I was super chill. And that freaked him out. So shortly after he wrote a letter addressing every point in a text thread that he had sent me. So I had gotten like an 11-point text message about all the ways that I was failing as a mom, as a wife, as a Christian, as a human. Pointed like number 1, you don't do this. Number 2, this
Oh
is
my
all your
God.
fault. Number 3, right? Yeah. And so that letter I got in response was refuting each of those points. In there, he said, God had shown him, God has shown me that I have been abusive. And he said it a few different times. And I remember it just really, like, I think he's right. So I'm a therapist, right? So I should
Mhm.
know, I know these things, but when you're
Mhm.
imagining it yourself, like it's so different.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I go back to Google and I'm like, what is abuse? What qualifies? Like in my mind, I know physical abuse, that's easy.
Mhm.
But when I'm not getting hit, but I'm being treated this, like, does any of the things I've been experiencing fall under abuse? And all of it? Like, check, 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 check. So that was the first time that I realized that I was being abused, and it took him admitting it, which didn't last long. About a month and a half later, he changed his mind, took it back. Never mind, I've never been abusive. If anyone has been, it's you. But by then I knew. By then I knew. And I wasn't going to be dissuaded because I could see it.
In a way, it's manipulation. He knows that he's being horrible to you, so he's going to say, "Hey, I'm horrible to you." So then he looks like a good guy. Okay, at least he's self-aware. Then a week later, he's just going to be like, "Nah, it's all you." And it's just a cycle. I've talked to so many women that have gone through, had a narcissistic husband and such, and it's like the same patterns. And this is why I like talking about this so much, so people can see the patterns and be like, I know it's not easy to get out. I've thankfully never experienced being in a relationship with a narcissist, but I, I'm trying to think of where I'm going with this. I never want to say just get out because I never experienced it. So I don't feel like I'm in the position to just think, oh yeah, just you hear it, just leave. Like, no, I know it's not easy like that. Like if you're someone like you're saying that has this low self-worth, you it may be hard for you to leave because then it's gonna kind of like confirm what
Mhm.
you're thinking of yourself. And also I know, like, I personally know some woman, not gonna say names of course, that is still in it.
Yeah. Someone told me critically, they were criticizing me, but they said, oh, yeah, leaving is the easy way out. And I was like, are you
Wait,
kidding?
what?
Yeah, leaving is the easy way out. And I was like, you know what's easy actually? Easy is staying. I say that very loosely, right? But
Hmm.
what would have been easier for me had I had the nervous system that was strong enough to do it? Justifiably, it wasn't. My nervous system expired, right? Like it was done.
Expired.
Yeah, that's what my therapist at the time,
That's
he was
a
like,
good thing to say. My nervous system. Sorry, I was thinking
expired.
of a wording. My nervous system expired. I
Yeah,
love that. Put it on a shirt and
straight
sell
up
it.
expired.
I'd buy it.
Expired. My survival skills expired. And so I felt like my body was like, Marcy, sweetie, we've tried really hard to let you make good choices. I'm laughing because it's like talking to a little kid, but that's like
You
who I
are.
feel like who I was. And so we've really tried to let you make good decisions and keep yourself safe, and you're just not doing a great job. So we're going to intervene. We're going to send you to the Bahamas, and we're just going to take care of this body until you're safely out of the situation. It was so weird. Like, I had to sign a credit card slip. I'd been married 17 years at this point. I had to
Yes.
sign a credit card slip and my maiden name came out. Like, just straight wrote my maiden name from 17 years before that I haven't written. But my brain had so disconnected me emotionally from that relationship that it had no connection, almost no memory of a connection. It was the weirdest thing. But eventually I came back to my body, to myself. But really, it took me getting out of the situation, which was the hardest thing ever. Leaving was not the easy way out. If
Hmm.
I The easy thing for me would have been learn how to manage this person,
Hmm.
deal with the predictability of the behavior, just embrace and acknowledge that I'm not going to have like a loving partnership like you see on TV, or that I just would love to have with somebody else. I don't have a mutual partnership, and just make it work for my kids, to have a
Hmm.
family that looks normal, for financial reasons, like for the life that we were getting to live, the quality of life, the location. Like, if I could have just had a nervous system that didn't intervene with
Hmm.
a trauma response, it would have been easier for me to figure out how to just keep doing what I'd been doing, even though my soul was dying. The hardest thing was leaving, facing all the stories and lies that would come up. There eventually was a lie that I was having an affair, a virtual online affair with a coworker, which I was not, but that's a story that some people out there believe happened, that I did. If I had stayed, there wouldn't be allegations of an affair out in the world that are untrue. Um, the financial piece, like learning to, I'm a single mom and I support my kids basically by myself, and I do everything for them alone, which I always did kind of do everything for them alone, but now like really, really alone, like with an
Yeah.
antagonist, like someone who's always being critical still, even though we're divorced, to like find where I'm doing something wrong to make a point of it or whatever. So yeah, it is not true that the easy way out is to leave a marriage. I think they all to be in a relationship with someone who's abusive or harmful, there's no easy way in or out. It's just really unfortunate that the other person won't be better and do the work they need to do to heal from their own injuries that lead them to behave that way. And ultimately that's what happened, right? Is if you're not going to choose to treat your family well, then you're not going to have a family. And following through on that is a devastating decision, because it's so painful, but it also was the best thing to ever happen to me, because I now realize that I have worth and value. My
Hmm.
kids have seen what a normal home should look like now, because they didn't
Hmm.
know. They thought that people, like, the dad should yell at the mom all the time or ignore her or whatever. So now my daughter has the most incredible fortitude and ability to choose healthy relationships in her life, my son as well. So what's come out of it has been incredibly powerful, but getting here sucked so bad.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely believe that people who go through abuse and hell are the ones who are, they went through it, they experienced it, now they're helping, other people. Like, I have my own past, I've had my own demons and such, and I'm doing this, the podcast, and I spent like majority of my day working on the whole brand overall, Mentally a Badass. I want to talk about when you decided that you wanted to make a career out of like coaching people how to storytell. Like, when did you realize like storytelling is so healing? Like, when was like
Yeah, that's a great question. I was living in story, loved story, had been working on story for years and years already. So even though my education is all in therapy and now trauma and resilience. I've always been a writer. And like you said, I always journaled for the longest time and it would just feel so great. And oftentimes I'd even reread what I had written and then suddenly like understand what I was thinking, which is a quote. Flannery O'Connor is an author who is quoted saying something like that. I write so that when I read, when I've written, I understand what I'm thinking. And that so resonated with me. Like, I don't know what I'm thinking until I've written it and I read it. And then I go, that's what's going on inside of me. So there was a personal experience I had with it as I was pursuing it professionally in the publishing industry and then just blogging and writing different places. I got to a point in my my career path. Guess I did a thumbs up. In my career path where I was really torn between two audiences that I serve, people who'd experienced some degree of trauma, often through the foster care system or adoption. That's a big topic of mine. I have adopted children and fostered children, and I worked in social services, so I had a lot to say. And then I had all these writers and these people that I was connected to, and I didn't know how those would come together into one lane that I could run. And then as I began to do more study into trauma and resilience specifically, I learned how much we've been mistreating trauma through talk therapy, that where our traumatic events sit in our brain is not the part of our brain that has access to language in the same way that we use in talk therapy. When you go in and someone talks to you and you talk back, we're not even touching the part of the brain storing traumatic events.
Interesting.
Yeah. So as I dug deeper, I began like, well, then where is that? And what does activate that part of our brain, which is our brainstem? And what activates it is really somatic, kind of uncensored things. And somatic being anything that's involving our body, our physical awareness, and allowing ourselves to communicate through our body without scripts or prompts or censorship. Right. So if I'm in class and I'm told to write an essay on this topic and I write an essay on that topic, I'm not tapping into my brainstem because I'm censoring, right? I'm filtering everything through that topic that I've been assigned. But when I sit and write by myself and I just free write, even though I'm using language, I'm tapping into it in a different way and I'm listening instead of producing. And so that's why that experience that you've had, that I've had with just writing and it
Mhm.
feeling good, and you realizing that maybe you're processing some things that are deep inside of you is a result and is acknowledgement of tapping into that part of our brain. Writing is just one of those ways. Music, physical activity of any kind, dance, painting. Like there's so many different ways that we
Mhm.
can listen to our bodies communicate from that brainstem space. But writing has become one of the ways that I help people the most. I do have a private practice therapy where I take people through learning tools and different ways that they can access that and become good listeners of what is in there needing to be heard. But when it comes to now story coaching and helping people still, as I did, and tell their stories and get those stories published and out into the world, now I get to do it with this really unique lens of understanding what their journey is going to be like, no matter what they're writing. Adult fiction, adult nonfiction, children's fiction, children, it doesn't matter who your audience is or whether it's fiction or nonfiction, the process taps into a really important part of the brain. So now I get to like approach that with people with a little bit of a glimmer in my eye because I know that I will know how to help them when or if they get stuck at different points because I'll know what the brain is doing in response. It's just it's the coolest thing. I nerd out.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, everyone's different when they go to therapy, but for me personally, I just feel just me just complaining about my life or talking or whatever, it doesn't really do much for me. But then again, like what I told you when I was writing those articles about living with bipolar and being bullied and all like mistreatments and stuff. And what I would write is some of it would be some pretty dark stuff. And the reason I had the confidence of doing that because no one knew that I was on the website. So no one knows me here, right? So yeah, that's literally why I was okay. I feel comfortable pretty much talking. And if you read it, I'm like deep into my brain, like, and
Yep.
then like the darkness of
Yep.
living with bipolar, and it was very therapeutic. And I actually started doing this like it was during the pandemic because you're home, you have more time, and I remember just like sitting down and just wow, like this is so relieving
Yeah.
of like all my stress and maybe that could have been something that healed a certain part of me, but I never thought about what part of the brain it was activating. You know, they always say journal, that's what every therapist says to do. But the way you're explaining it, that makes sense. And I also feel like when people journal, they talk about their day. That's typically what therapists say, like talk about your day, and that will help you get rid of any bad thoughts and go to bed and such. But the power of sitting down and just telling your story on paper, especially for people who are not comfortable with telling their story like on a podcast or online. And trust me, I talk to random people like not on the street, but like in person and such. And when I talk about my brand to them, and I'm open about them, and I'm like, yeah, bipolar disorder, I have BPD, yeah, I've been bullied. I talk about things where people are like, oh wow, she really be telling us everything. But the thing is that I'm in a position where if they think that, sure, but I'm trying to build a world where it's normalized to talk like that. Like, people don't have the kind
Yes.
of confidence or just like, courage to talk about. And that's why I love having this podcast, because they are people on the internet like you that are willing to come on here. I've had some people come on here and tell me even more detail about like an event, the way she was taught, this one person, the way she was telling storytelling. I'm a very empathetic person, so when she was telling her story, she got raped by her uncle. It was a very, very dark story, and the way she was storytelling, I was like gonna cry myself on the podcast. I was like, Justine, hold this together. But she has so much courage, and the way she explained, because she basically kind of walked me through it, which I did not expect her to walk me through the whole rape. But I mean, the way she wants to tell it, absolutely. Of course, I put a lot of trigger warnings on that episode, but yeah, I'm like, I have so much respect for you, like just even going that deep. And yeah, so my point is with that, it's like that's a goal here, is so teaching people how to story tell. What would you have to say to people that feel like their life is boring or not traumatic enough? You know what I mean? Because there's an example I wanted to bring up where I don't know your opinion on it, so I don't really want to bring it up.
Go
But
ahead. I'm so ready. I'm so
uh,
fascinated.
okay, so I don't know. I'm sure you probably heard about the whole Selena Gomez thing.
I've heard some things. Which
Okay,
thing?
the part
Which thing?
when she was crying on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when people saw it, they all got pissed off at her, right? And I understand both sides. So it's like if you're someone who is thinking that she's crying over people who are criminals and that would piss somebody off, yeah, I mean, of course. But she was crying because of how she comes from um, a Mexican family, and she's just talking about like I guess like her, I don't know, it could be like someone close to her that I don't know exactly what's going on in her life at that moment, of course,
Right.
but the point is that people were attacking her. Like even the White House was attacking her.
I didn't see that part.
Yeah, yeah. It's all over like it's all over the because I'm on social media a lot, which is like but yeah, at one point I saw that literally the White House posted a video about her. Like literally like the government making fun of her pretty much. It was just so bad. But my point is like Selena Gomez, whatever she was going through at that moment should be either validated or just don't say anything because that's messed up. And she's also been very open about her mental health with like bipolar, and she has documentary, and she's known for being open about her mental health.
Yeah.
Her whole like rare beauty brand has a lot to do with mental health, and she donates to like for organizations, like she does so much for the mental health community. So seeing a video of her crying is not like is completely, but then also her being an actress, people think that she's just like, well then again, like what's her motive? There's not there's
There's so
there's
much.
no motive. And
Yeah.
there was literally like some people from the government that was like saying we should support Selena Gomez, which makes no sense. People were just being so mean.
Mhm.
And so it's like in that position, if I was Selena Gomez, I would think whatever I'm crying about this, I'm processing a certain trauma or just anything, like it doesn't matter because it's not as big as someone who I guess is getting deported. It's kind of like my question is, what do you have to say to people who feel that they can't story tell because they feel like their trauma is not good enough or
Yeah.
traumatizing enough?
I think you actually raised two really important things there. One is the question you asked directly, which I'll get to. The other one is there is wisdom in where and to who we share our stories, right? Like with whom we share them. So for example, with Selena's case, what she might have learned is that that depth of vulnerability and pain might have been reserved for like her closest friends and family
Yeah.
and not the whole world. And I'm not criticizing her, right? There's a possibility there that she can take away that lesson. Or maybe some of us watching, like for me, I might say the world didn't receive that well. That might have been something I would keep closer and reserve that story for certain places if I'm still really, really in my feels. Right.
Hmm.
Or somebody can say, no, this is exactly what I want to show the world. And they can think their thoughts about it, but I'm going to show that I'm empathetic. And so I think there's a wisdom that comes with who we are sharing our stories with, where we are sharing them, why we are sharing them. And so the easy, I guess, consequence would be for someone to go, oh, I need to share my story, and then just without regard, put it out everywhere. And not everywhere is safe to
Hmm.
share your stories, right? Even for you to choose Medium, you chose it because people don't really know me here. And I can feel that like distance, that a little bit of that anonymity while I'm talking about and processing important things. And maybe sometimes not even having a following feels really good. Like no one is actually, I'm posting it, but like nobody's following me to read it. So I think there's some wisdom that, especially with our really deep stories and our really, the stories that are still very much in process for us, we need to use some discernment about where that goes. There's a great verse in the Bible that I think about that talks about not casting our pearls before swine. Like pigs will stampede, trample anything that's thrown in their path. And so why would we put our most precious things in the path of people who are going to trample it? Right. So
Hmm.
there's just some wisdom there that I think if you're someone considering, okay, I do want to start talking about this somewhere. Like it's okay to use wisdom and not just go throw that out into the world. Like start with a trusted friend. So that was something I thought you raised that was really important. As far as somebody feeling like they don't have a traumatic enough story, you do, because you live in this, you're on this planet right now. We all came through a global pandemic, which is a traumatic event. Even if not everybody experienced it to the same level of trauma, it was a traumatic event. We all had to navigate things that were really hard. The division in our country, the division in our homes, in our friendship circles, on opinions around vaccinating or not vaccinating. If you lost loved ones, like, and then there's people who have almost a guilt because it ended up being a really good, positive experience for them. It
Hmm.
brought their family closer together. It gave them rest that they needed. They were on the brink of burnout. And so now you've got people out there living with guilt that it was such a positive experience. So if you lived through that, you've been through a traumatic experience. That's enough, even if you had the peachiest childhood. And now we've got the last few years of governmental things, and even the last few months, again, regardless of where you are politically, there's a tremendous amount of change going on. And there's a lot of people in our country who are very afraid and sad, and then you've got people who are so finally like feeling optimistic and hopeful about the future. And wherever you land there, you're in contradiction with somebody else.
Yeah.
You just are. So there's so much happening that if someone came to me and said, I haven't really had that much trauma, I'd be like, are you kidding? I think you're maybe numb because you've had so much
Yeah.
trauma. You can't even tell what's trauma or not trauma anymore, which is okay. Like, not okay, but it's easy to say that. But let's just say someone came through unscathed, like somehow in our world and in our culture, and just really feels like, gosh, I don't have anything to share. Okay. We are not lone wolves on this planet. There's no experience that is the sole experience of a single human. And so there is probably a whole population of people who feel like you. Like,
Hmm.
gosh, life has been so hard for so many other people, but all those things have actually been really positive for me. And I've got feelings about that, or I want to talk about it. You're getting to bring people together who otherwise feel alone and unheard and unseen and probably a little bit ashamed or embarrassed. And you get to create now a space where that conversation happens. So even if you think you don't have enough hard story to offer, you're not alone. You now have a story of feeling that way and providing spaces where people can begin to talk about that. And what does it mean to live on a planet where everyone's gone through something hard but you?
Hmm.
And you'll probably discover that there's some hardship even in that story
Hmm.
that people need to bond around and realize they're not alone around. And so I genuinely believe that everybody has an important story, regardless of how you got to where you are right now.
I mean, our whole life is a story,
The
literally.
whole life,
I'm
all of
on
it.
chapter 29.
Yeah. Yeah, how's that going? Is it a good chapter so far?
Let me think about that.
It's a story. Every good story has what we call slaps.
What's
Has
that?
slaps. That's like the obstacles that you face, right? So every character in a story, and this is true for our life stories, there's desires and goals that we have. Even if it's just to get out of bed. Like it doesn't have to be
Every
some
morning.
every morning. I have a little thing on my phone that's like I get to mark it off when I get out of bed, which is just
Really?
feels yeah.
Wait,
It's a
what is
fun
that? Is
app.
that?
I'll have to say
Oh,
it's
okay.
called Finch.
Yes.
I keep a little penguin alive and or happy, I guess, rather. And
Please tell me about it.
I
When like we're off, of course. I'm gonna put a reminder.
yes, like getting out of bed is something I get to mark off. And I nail that one every day and I'm so proud of myself. So, but we are all on a journey, right? And journeys have goals and desires. We want something. Even if we're trying to numb that desire, we still have it. We all want something. And it could be relationships. Like I just want a friend. I want a life partner who doesn't abuse me. I want to reach this level of success in a business or whatever it might be. And on our journey to that thing, we're constantly getting slapped, right? There's all
Mhm.
these obstacles that come up and try to get in the way. This is actually what develops our resilience, is our ability to face those slaps and realize that we can make decisions. So what happens is when people feel hopeless or helpless, they enter a freeze state and now they don't make any forward progress. They're not developing the resilience. They're just not going anywhere, right? But when we face that and we remind ourselves, no, I get to make a decision here. Even if it feels like life is being done to me, I get to decide what to do with that information. Even if I keep doing that somehow, even if I'm in an abusive relationship, right? I get to decide if I'm going to stay in it or not stay in it. I get to decide if I'm going to do the hard work that's required to have the life that I want to have. I get to decide if I'm going to keep living the way my parents modeled or do it differently. I get to decide. So every time we get slapped with life, we have decisions that we get to make. And maybe they don't look like great decisions. It might be bad thing A or bad thing B, but we get to decide and we get to choose it and we get to believe in something better. And so life is full of chapters that have all kinds of slaps. But then when we overcome that, we're actually giving our body an experience with successfully processing through a hard thing. Then that event doesn't get become trauma. So you can go through a traumatic event and it not become trauma by processing through it. The events that become trauma did not get to be processed through, so they get stuck in our brain, in the brainstem in a particular way. So I'm even giving us some language here around what is trauma. We throw it around very casually, but not every traumatic event becomes unprocessed trauma. So when we enter these life challenges, and we face them and we make decisions about them, we're showing our body that we are capable, that we're not helpless. We do get to make decisions. And every time we make a decision and then we experience the consequence of that decision, positive or negative, we're learning. We're not failing, we're learning. And now we get to take that learning and make our next decision. And that
Mhm.
is how we develop resilience in us so that one day when the big traumatic event occurs, we have the resilience we need to really overcome it much better than if we'd never done the practice with the smaller things in life leading up. So you're right. Life is a story and we're living it. And it's a beautiful, wild, chaotic roller coaster story. But there's so much good that is developed in us when we keep pressing towards the things that we hope for and want, regardless of circumstances.
Yeah. I was when you were saying that, I was thinking of there's like this like tattoo, and it's meant towards like people. I remember now. Semicolon. The semicolon tattoo is yes, yes. My boyfriend has that one too. I should get. I got a bird one.
Yeah.
This one has to do mental health wise, being like freeing from my past of like self harm and everything. But the semicolon one, so that's like the one that everybody knows, and it's like your story's not over.
Yes.
There's no period.
There's no
You
period.
keep going, and that's it's so powerful, and just like realizing that your life is literally a story. It can be a show if you want to. Like
Sure. It can
it's
be
just
musical.
it's just the way you think about it. And it's like also just if something bad happens to you and you just come out of that and you just keep going, like just being like super grateful for that. And I have a question for you. There's a lot of controversy, I guess, over where people used to say what doesn't kill you make you stronger. Like a lot of people I've been noticing lately in like online, like the mental health community, is that people get pissed off at that. They get pissed off. They're like, no, it didn't make me stronger. It made me like mental, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
it gave me this, it gave me that. I'm actually kind of wondering if I just did a joke like that on one of my reels. Am I like one of the people who did that? But I'm literally thinking right now, it's like, I don't know, I gotta look back now. But I do believe I understand both sides. Like
I
I
think it
believe in
depends.
that the resilience, but I also can
Yeah,
understand how like trauma can make people like with BPD or CPTSD, it can make it harder for people to live life versus someone who didn't experience that. So I get both how they would get upset about that, but I also just me how I live my life. I'm more towards like the whole what doesn't kill you make you stronger. So it's like two different
yeah.
views.
I think it depends on when you're telling somebody that and why you're telling it to them, right? So if someone has just had, okay, one of the pieces of my story is that my mother-in-law was murdered by my father-in-law in the house that I was sleeping in 4 days before our first wedding anniversary. And I wrote a memoir on that. It's called While We Slept, Finding Hope and Healing After Homicide. I'm sharing that because if that day someone had come to me and been like, "Oh, Marcy, it's okay. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." Yeah, I probably would have been one of the mad people, not because the timing is just wrong, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't need someone to come tell me that surviving the murder of my mother-in-law is going to make me stronger right then. Is it
Mm-hmm.
true that there's every possibility in the world that something that devastating can make me stronger? Yes. I believe that every hard thing has the potential to make us stronger if we choose it, if we allow it, if we pursue that. We can also choose not to. We can choose to stay in a place of victimhood. We can choose to stay in a place of pain and grief and not pursue the help that's available to keep us moving forward. And there are going to be circumstances where somebody's nervous system or mental health really makes moving forward hard. So even in that case, I wouldn't judge somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a timing, right? Now, years later, when I talk about the story, I can completely say that what didn't kill me made me stronger. And it's true. So I
Yeah.
think there's something about how we use things like that. There's so many like that too that people will say, like, oh, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Right? What? Like, I'm not handling this, right? Like, clearly he does. And so there's just a lot of things that people say because they don't know what to say and they really want to encourage and help and be supportive, and this is just the like these are the lines that come up for us, and so it's really just a matter of timing. For people though who are really mad about it, um, I guess I would just have some questions or hope even for those people that even if they're in the middle of it and they're like, man, this this is not making me stronger, I, if they were willing, would begin to ask some questions about what do they want in life? What are their hopes? What do they want tomorrow to look like or the day after to look like? And what are they willing and able to do to get there? Because again, when we look at resilience, it is showing our nervous system that we are capable of overcoming the hard thing that's in front of us in some way. And when we show our bodies that we can do that, it develops this belief that makes the next hard thing feel less hard because we now have developed some muscles, right? Like if I'm going to go be in a boxing ring, if I were to get thrown into one today, I'm going to be like, oh no, I'm dead. This is going to kill me. My whole body knows it. There's nothing in my system that believes I have a chance. But if I've been practicing, if I've been doing workouts and muscle workouts and I don't know, do you box scrimmages, scrimmage box? If I've done like lower key, then I'm going to be able to enter a boxing ring with way more confidence that's based in the reality of the training I've put in and the muscles I've developed. Right? That is kind of like life when we are willing to do some of that work to develop the mental muscles that we need to handle this life. We're going to have a different confidence when we get to the next hard thing, and we're going to have a different confidence in our current hard thing. But if we're not ever willing to do that work to start the muscle building that's needed, then yeah, we are going to remain in a position of unbelief that we're capable of more than we think. When actually I think most of us are capable of far more than we think. And we don't know it till like the rubber meets the road. So, yeah, I too understand both sides. And for those who are more upset about it, I would just have some questions and a lot of compassion. Like they
Hmm.
just may not be in a place yet where they can see that there's any possibility of good, and that's okay. It's okay to see that for a little bit. And then hopefully we don't stay there though, right? Hopefully we move beyond that.
Yeah, it made me think of, I actually recently just edited an episode of this woman who says that they're doing the best of what they know at the moment. So when she said that, I'm like, that makes sense. So it gives me the compassion. I try my best to if I see, especially now with what's going on in the world and on Threads or just any other social media platform, because it's being just pushed into our face. If you know what I mean, it's like everyone has their own opinions and then
Yeah,
everyone's getting mad at other people's opinions. And then I'm just sitting here I wish people can understand that it's not everybody thinks like them and they're doing what they know. I see so
yeah,
many, and I even think in my head too. I shared this really funny meme from Mean Girls where Regina George gave all of this gossip in the paper, and then people got out of class and they read everything and they start acting like animals and going at each other, and then it's like Regina George is just staying there watching the chaos. And so I made a joke and I'm like, guys, do you understand Regina George is the government? There's so much media out there, so many media outlets, and their goal is to get people fighting. That's
yes.
their first goal. Second is to inform you.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like TikTok was such an example of that recently
Hmm.
with the ban and then the unban. Like watching people bond and end up on a Chinese app to like make a point and to be the people that like have access to each other was such a fascinating experience because I think this time in history is so unique in that
Hmm.
in the past, right, it was just top down, top down. We really did feel helpless. We don't feel helpless anymore. We know how to
Yeah.
reach each other, and the world has shrunk, right? We can all go to China by opening our phone and putting on a particular app. And now we have all these Chinese relationships. People are learning Mandarin. Like,
Yeah.
it's incredible. But I think that, again, those were people who said, I get to make a decision. They
Hmm.
weren't just like, oh no, look what's being done to me. I have no power here. It's been stripped. All those migrants to the Red Note app were like made a decision, right?
Hmm.
In the face of what otherwise could have just felt like rights being removed. They were like, well, fine. You're worried about this. Let me just go do it for you. And I think that's just one example of many that are occurring right now in our culture that are showing us that we have far more capability and power than we realized. And some of that's the tools we have available to us, like social media, that we didn't have before, right?
Mm.
It's really brought us together in a unique way. But I think Hollywood is learning the same lesson that just because you have this certain celebrity status doesn't mean that you're just everyone's darling anymore. Like your life is pretty public, and now people are making decisions about how they feel about your life and
Hmm.
deciding whether they're going to watch your movies or not based on how you're living or how you treat others or whatever it might be. We're in such an
Like
interesting
Blake
time.
Lively right now.
Lively about don't like
Yeah. He's on
everything.
blast right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching things over at Daily Wire as well. Like, there's so many examples, I think, of greater organizations, star power, governmental agencies learning that we've all bonded and found each other. And to your point, where the goal has been to divide us,
Hmm.
there's still a lot of division. They've been very effective in a lot of places, but there's a coming together of people bonding and saying, no, enough of that. Like, we don't need any of them. Let's just unite over being human, which has been really interesting to watch. And I'm curious to see if we'll continue to use that for good, because that can get exploited for bad too, right? But we'll see.
Yeah, I like the optimism that you have because unless our fees are different, I've been seeing a lot more people at each other, unless the people I follow are two completely different
Oh, so much.
worlds.
Yeah.
But I see people sharing on their stories, it's all this or that, or this side's doing this or this side's doing that or whatever. And at that point, it was just getting really bad for my mental health because when you're
Yeah.
consuming so much
Yep.
negativity, it's
Yep.
just crappy, it's stressful. So I literally just started muting everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's literally what I had to do is mute everybody. And that was around the time where I'm just like, guys, we can have an opportunity to all stand together and be the people against the government, not the people against the people. Because I feel
Yeah.
like that's what the government's doing right now. And they know exactly what they're doing. A lot of people, because most people don't understand human behavior, or don't have that
Yeah,
kind of knowledge and such, and
yeah.
how it's so easy to piss people off. I'm going to give you an example right now. You probably already know this, but as someone who has a podcast and does production, does editing, and also I've been doing content creation since 2016, I know how easy it is to think of which narrative do I want to do with this piece of content.
Hmm.
I think of that. I was editing an episode for my guests. And by the way, I would never, ever, ever make a guest look bad. I always make sure the narrative's good. But there was this one part where she said something, but it was like I misinterpreted it. If I cut that part and took out the part where she's like, "Oh no, that's not what I meant," it would make her look bad. So that's what I'm saying, how easy it is. And when if I were to do that cut and it can still be smooth. So
Yeah.
it's like I would never, of course, putting that out there because you know you're my guest. I would never, ever, ever do that to any of my guests. But if I were to be unethical,
You can see how
I
easy it is
could
to do.
easily make my guests put them in a dark light. And then also like just as editing and just putting it out into the world, naturally I have to make things as entertaining as possible. So I'm thinking like, okay, which teeth should I put first is going to hook people in? Okay, should I take certain words out that made people not want to like listen through, like just like little editing techniques. So I'm like, I sat down with all this content. I'm like, okay, what's the narrative? I've been editing things since 2016. I tell people, like everyone who's freaking out over, oh, I saw this on TikTok or I saw this in the media or this, I'm just like, we don't know.
We
And
don't
it's, we
know.
don't, at the end of the day, unless you're physically there, it's like you don't know. Like, I don't know if you know who Charlie Stirk or whatever, I forgot his
Really
name.
Kirk. Yeah.
Yes, Kirk Stirk. Okay, so he always debates college student. I don't know if you've ever seen those,
Huh?
and I do find some of it interesting. It's just like entertainment for me, but I noticed that obviously he's only going to put in content that he's stumped them, I guess, and make them look bad to make him look good. So to create this narrative that he knows everything. So obviously he's not going to put a clip where he loses to the debate. And then there was this one debate that he was having, and the guy who was the other guy, not Charlie, who was when he was debating, he had a head on his shoulders. He had his facts there and everything. There, I noticed there was a jump cut.
Huh. Yeah, especially when you edit, you get to notice a lot
I
more of
noticed a
the
jump cut.
spices.
Yeah, and then I like I was like comment. I'm like, guys, there's a huge jump cut. We really don't know really what just happened.
Yeah. It's everywhere, right? Like I lived in Israel for a bit about 20 something years ago. I was a student there and I would watch riots get staged. Like in
I
the
can see.
Muslim quarter, like I would watch. Now I want to be careful because I know I just brought up another hot topic. Like I have friends all over. I have Israeli friends, I have Palestinian friends, I have friends all over. So I have a lot of feeling about it. I have a lot of history and knowledge.
Mhm.
That all of that aside, living there, I watched riots get staged like in Palestinian areas. They would bring out the little okay, throw a riot, and CNN would record the riot and then cut, and everyone would go back to normal. And on the news would be like, "Oh, there's riots over here because of this and this and that," and I'd have to write home. CNN's the
And you
worst.
were there?
I was there. I watched it, so I'd have to write home and be like, "You're everyone I love. Oh,
You're
you're
not
gonna
nice to
see."
do with the topic.
Yeah, CNN
What?
report this. Here's what really happened. Or, obviously things do happen. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
what happened on October 7th happened. Now all the conversation is why and who and how and all the things. But even in that situation, like I would like maybe we did have a bus attack and two people would die. CNN would
Hmm.
report 14 people died and make it
Yeah.
a bigger thing, right? And so I'd always write home like, yes, there was an attack. Souls were lost, like there was really death, but
Hmm.
they're going to blow it up to this.
They
And to
amplify.
your point, like I wouldn't have known if I didn't live there and watch this happen all the time, or I would see a poster or a picture that was taken. And the actual event was like an IDF soldier helping a Palestinian up off the ground who fell. But someone would snap that picture and say, "Look, that IDF soldier shoved that Palestinian down onto the ground." And they would create this whole story around a snapshot, right? But if I wasn't there seeing it in real life, I would be like, so that made me realize how much we do not know.
Yes,
We do not
exactly.
know.
Like I can totally I have a story too in a way. I live in Florida. So we're the hurricane capital, right? And I've been in so many hurricanes, and the way people nationally, they make it seem like everyone's gonna die, everyone evacuate. I have people from I'm from New Jersey, so I have family from there being like, you better get out, come to Jersey. Like I get that all the time. I've been dealing with hurricanes since 2016, and so I was in the Ian one, the one with like Fort Myers and such. And of course, on the news, it's like, oh, these people died, this is the body toll, and this and that, right? Yeah, of course it was tragic, but the thing is, it's like they're not being very specific. It's Fort Myers Beach that people died, and I'm in Fort Myers. So I did lose like power and water and even cell communication. So since I lost cell communication, people thought I died.
Yeah.
Like I had family friends and like thinking I'm dead, everyone's freaking out. And it's like I get it, especially if they're not hearing back from me. Totally understand that part. But like so I didn't know. I was like, I look outside my apartment, I'm like, everything looks fine. I don't get it. And then like we drive up into the main road and we see left down and okay, yeah, it was bad. But the thing is that nationally they think people are dead. I mean, you know what I mean? Like
The
everyone's dead
city's
everywhere.
wiped
Like we're
out.
all just dead, you know? And another thing
I'm glad you're all not just dead.
Another thing too is that for the people who die, it's tragic. Totally get that. But the thing is that people are not saying is that the authorities do go up and down their blocks and says you need to evacuate. This is a dangerous area. You need to. Like, they do that so much. But if you're not choosing to leave and you die, of course I don't want anyone dying. But come on, you know? And it's like they physically cannot grab you out of your house and take you. Like they legally can't do that. So it's just like they leave all of that out. And that's why everybody freaks out is that they don't understand that here in Florida, we have plans. The authorities, it's not their first rodeo. We all have a plan to be safe and to avoid dying, but there's people who are stubborn
Yeah.
and
Yep.
they think like, oh, it's fine, no big deal. And so I live in Central Florida, so I'm landlocked. So I'm like one of the safest places, and I've been through so many hurricanes. And a lot of times they, of course, in Florida, they make it seem they only show like if anything like a palm tree is down or something like that. They'll only show that. But they won't show like the rest of it. Like 10% of Orlando would be like, "Oh wow, look at all this palm tree stuff on the ground." They like show in a way where it's like, oh my god, it's so tragic. And then I'll be like texting my people. I'm like, guys, like I never want to say, oh, it really wasn't that bad. What if something, obviously something tragic happened to someone died? From what I've seen and from my experience, it's not as bad in my area. Like I was like literally when the hurricane was happening, my friend came over, we got some like wine and we were like watching Disney Channel. We're just living life, you know? And then so I still had like all my power in the internet and I would literally record from my Instagram and post so people can see what I see. And my cousin was like, "Oh, you guys are out here just watching Hannah Montana." I'm like, "Yes,
We're fine.
we're fine." Like, and I was even walking outside. I was in my balcony, and I hear once in a while I'll see a car pass by. I was shook, and I recorded it. I was like, I don't think I recorded because it was like the timing of course. It wasn't like there was cars going back and forth,
Right.
but every
Right.
once in a while I'll see a car, and I would like at that point, I think I had a couple of glasses of wine. I said to my friend, I was like, we out here seeing cars. And then people were like, my friend's like, well, maybe they're going to work or something like that. So, yeah. And then eventually at like 2 o'clock in the morning, the power went out and everything like that. But it's just, it's not like there's some parts, like it's really just the areas of like where the shore is. That's
Yeah.
where it's really bad. But they evacuate and you should be okay. But my point is, like, as you were saying, is that the news just makes it more than it really is. And since I've experienced seeing like how the news is just going crazy for no reason and how family is just like texting me thinking one thing or another and then you just telling me what's happening in Palestine, I'm just like, oh my god. Yeah. So
I think the point that you raise, especially when we think of the division, is that we never know the full story of a global issue, of a national issue, of government decisions, even. I mean, there's times where I may not like the governmental decisions that are being made, but I'm still aware that I don't have all the information. I do not have
exactly.
all the information. And so what happens is in the absence of having all the information, our brains fill the gaps with our own stories. They must be deciding this because they hate Mexicans, right? Like whatever It must
Sure.
be because it must be. And then we get ourselves all fired up. And I think that if we can all slow down, and this isn't just governmental and media, this is in our own relationships. This is like me with
Hmm.
my kids, me with my friend, me with my family, is always slowing down and recognizing I do not have the whole story. I don't. And even if I had the whole story, I'm coming at it from my life experience, my values, my belief system, my
Hmm.
everything, and imposing that on someone else. And so it really allows for us to have a lot more compassion, and or should, and being able to slow down and let somebody be where they are without all of the judgment. Now, I may not like what they're doing with the information I have, but I get to
Hmm.
decide what to do about that. And being
Right.
angry and causing more vitriol and more division is not productive to me. In my value system, that's not a solution. So I'm not going to be the person out there just like keyboard warrior about all my angry opinions about things, because I don't see that as effective. Someone else might do that, and I'm going to keep scrolling, right? So
Hmm.
I'll come back to like, yes, we're all living a story, and we're living our stories with other people living their stories. There's so much we
So
don't know.
complicated.
Right. It's complicated. It's so complicated and it's so simple. Like if we just slow
Yeah.
down and let people be where they are, like we need to be allowed to be where we are in life, then we all have a much better coexistence together, or at least the possibility of it. And then we get to make our own decisions, right? I don't want to be around somebody like that. I don't want to live in a country like this. I don't want to, whatever. Like even going back to my marriage, like, no, I'm not ever going to be treated like that ever again. I've learned that about myself. And so I'm going to make that decision. I could have decided to be a victim for the rest of my life and never trust another man and think that God is bad and all the things. People didn't make those decisions. That's not the decision I've made. I think one person made the decisions that one person made. I let them, and now I'm not. Now I'm not going to let them. And now I'm going to believe that there are other people in the world who are more aligned with me in
Hmm.
how I believe others should be treated. And I'm going to find those people, and that's what I'm going to do. So I think it's easy to be angry, and it's easy to victimize ourselves and others and blame shift. And that will never move any of us forward.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely easy to be negative than taking that time
Mhm.
to think about someone else's side, think thoroughly about what's happening, and because of what we know and what you know, when I'm constantly bombarded with different articles of what's happening, it's like I don't even want to see it because I like I don't even know I don't want to like get angry if it's really not even like the real story, but I can
Yeah.
go on and on about that. But I do want to talk about you and what you do. Cause I never heard of like
Yeah.
story coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's something definitely new, and I'm sure for a lot of people. So, what exactly do you do?
Yeah. So, at an overview, what I do is I help people tell their stories and get those stories into the world. And so, for some people, that's well, and I should say I primarily do that through writing and publishing. Although I have helped speakers get their stories out that way. I've helped musicians get their stories out that there's so many ways you can get your stories out, but primarily I focus on people who are wanting to write their story. Again, that could be fiction, nonfiction, children, adult, it doesn't matter. They have a story they want to tell, and I can help them tell it to the best of its ability, to the best of their ability, and for the greatest impact on the human brain, because I understand the brain. So I can help make sure the story is hitting the right elements.
Mhm.
And then publishing. So I help people through various different tiers of publishing services, whether I do the entire publishing project for them, or I might be showing them how to do it so they can do it themselves and repeat it over and over, or just giving them all the tools and resources they need to do it themselves. I do feel called from a place of purpose to help people tell their stories and
Mhm.
share those stories. We didn't touch on this very much, but the power of having somebody witness your story as you tell it
Mhm.
and accept you and make space for you is part of the healing journey.
Mhm.
It's such a powerful thing to be heard by somebody and accepted as you share the hard things that you're sharing. So I get to do that. And then on the side a bit, I mentioned having a private practice in therapy, and I have a therapeutic group I call Anchored, where I take people on a 6-week journey of adding to their toolbox different somatic tools that they can use just in their everyday life to help their systems stay regulated and not expire like mine did. Um, and to be able to make healing accessible to the everyday person. So that's what I do. I do that through the lens of publishing, and then I do that through the lens of caring for people in therapeutic ways.
Yeah, and I think that's great for people who want to write a book and it's just like I want to tell my story, but like I have no idea where to start. Like, and then some people can also just like procrastinate in that way too because they can't get it out. So I'm assuming that could be something you
Yes.
help them with.
Yes, I have a
Yeah.
community as well. It's only presently $10 a month. It's called the Writer's Block. And we do group coaching calls. I bring community together so they have other people to journey with as well. I do expert interviews. I'm just always trying to provide resources for people wherever they are on that journey. So even if they're just like thinking about it, I can help them begin to get things down, and like even the validation of, is this a good story? Is this the right story for me to tell? How should I tell it? Like all of those questions that come up are an expertise of mine. And so I nerd out on it with people. And then I've gotten to just see so many incredible authors get their stories out who otherwise thought they couldn't do it. And now
Yeah.
I got to show them that they can, and they did.
Yeah. And I saw your ebook and I read it. And for everyone who's listening, I highly recommend it because actually I read it from start to finish. Usually I'm a person that I read and I kind of like skim through it because I just
Yeah.
have really bad ADHD. But I actually read from start to finish. So if I can do it, you can do it. Got
Okay. Published books of my own, and I think they're all award winning, and many of them have been best-selling.
Amazon? Or
Amazon, they're all available on Amazon. If you search Marcy Pusey on Amazon, it'll pop up. Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Costco, all those places carry my books either online or in the store. And yeah, I'm on Instagram as well at Marcy Marie. So people are welcome to follow. And if you've got a story you want to tell, I've got some free resources that I can share with people. And again, I feel called to do this. So as much as it's my livelihood, it's also my deep delight to help
mm-hmm.
people get their messages out there.
It's the greatest gift when
Thank
you're
you.
able to do what you're passionate about, like for a living. But I really, really appreciate you coming on. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise, likewise. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
of course. I had to like pivot a little bit. 'Cause I was like, oh my god, I can talk to her for like 5 hours. But yeah, no, you're awesome. I have all your information in the description. People want to check you out. But thank you again so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you.
Thanks, Justine.